As a coalition, we are not in the business of nation building or reconstruction. We must ensure that our respective nations' precious and limited resources are devoted to preventing the resurgence of ISIS and equipping the war-torn communities to take the lead in rebuilding their institutions and returning to stability.
Iraq has been crippled by conflict. For years, the country has had to deal with a brutal battle against Daesh. Now the terror group has been defeated, it's time to rebuild. And Iraq's prime minister says it needs up to $100 billion. But will Baghdad get as much help as it needs? This week, a conference is being held in Kuwait to fund the reconstruction. And while the U.S. is set to attend, sources in Washington say they won't commit to anything financially. But should they? Well, one man with plenty of experience when it comes to Iraq is retired U.S. Brigadier General Mark Kimmit. He joins me now in the studio. Good to have you on the Newsmakers again, General Kimmit. So, why is it the case that we have this Kuwait conference and Washington doesn't really want to contribute any funds to reconstruction? Is that a mistake?
Well, first of all, I think that's an unfair criticism. The United States has helped significantly with stabilization and humanitarian assistance. Most recently, this year and last year, about $2 billion. We are not saying we don't want to help with reconstruction. However, more than likely that will not be as donor grants, but as investment. Iraq's a great place to operate. It's open for business. So rather than let government funds help with the reconstruction, we know that governments are horrible at these kind of programs. Let's let the private industry do this instead with investment projects.
But Haider al-Abadi is not calling for $100 billion of investment in the country. That's a separate thing. They're calling for aid, for reconstruction aid. And for those who have followed Iraq from 2003, you would agree that the United States has been the fundamental player here. You break it, you buy it. Come on, you were involved in smashing it up. Even if you believe it was righteous that you smashed it up when Saddam was overthrown and so on. So come on, man, chip in.
Well, we're not talking about bringing no money into Iraq, and it may very well be the case that the Secretary of State does announce some grants and donations. But look at this administration. This is an administration back in the Washington, D.C. that says, we're not in the business of nation building. Let's do what we do best. Let's let investors go in, bring the money in, and get a good return on their money. Take a look at President Trump, a businessman. Secretary of State Tillerson, a businessman. They don't believe in nation building. They do believe in national investment.
There's talk of trying to get the Saudis to contribute to try and isolate the Iranians and get the Iraqis to move towards the Saudis. Would that be the way to go?
Well, that's a different matter entirely. We encourage the Saudis to invest in Iraq, whether it's in the form of private investment or government donations. If there are some political or geostrategic alignments that come with that money, that's an issue for the Saudis to determine themselves.
Something that you said at the very beginning, you said that governments are terrible at dealing with this money. Do you not trust the Iraqi government with hundreds of millions of dollars?
Well, let's be clear. We've had concerns for years and years about the corruption inside of Iraq. But I don't think you're going to get that money, that private money, to come into Iraq unless they believe that money is generally free of corrupting influences and they can get an adequate return. Look, I do that all the time. I am in Iraq to bring private money to get an adequate return. We think that Iraq is a great place to invest, a frontier market, and those risks of corruption, of lack of financial transparency, this is what companies do around the world, and for that they expect a reasonable return.
Is what the Trump administration is saying now, and we heard Secretary of State Tillerson speaking about the fact that we are not involved in nation building, you're there, you're fighting still at times. Daesh is defeated, but of course people are a little bit wary. What does this say about the United States in Iraq and the United States in the Middle East in general? Is this another indication of the U.S. kind of extricating itself as a government from the region?
Well, I don't think so at all. We're working side by side with over 70 nations to address the ISIL threat. We don't believe we're going anywhere inside of Iraq. We may change our military dispositions. We certainly aren't going to change our diplomatic responsibilities, nor are we going to change. In fact, we may be even encouraging far more investment, private investment, into the country that you're seeing now. So we are in Iraq for the long term. The manner and the style of that investment will take different forms over the years.
So again, just to kind of reiterate, for those who read the headline and they say Iraq is having a donors conference and the U.S. doesn't want to contribute money to rebuilding Iraq, and they ask, aren't they absolving themselves of their fundamental responsibility to help the Iraqi people? You believe that's false?
I certainly do. I think people need to read beyond the headline. We are helping significantly with humanitarian assistance, getting rid of those IEDs that you see around the country. We are heavily involved in the stabilization. But when it comes to the reconstruction, there's a good place for donor funding, which some nations want to do, and there's the right place for investment. Rather than have the governments do it, let's unleash the private markets to help out inside of Iraq.
Okay, General Kimmit, thanks for joining us again on the Newsmakers.
Yeah, thanks for having me.